In the quiet corners of our loud and chaotic world, there exists a rare kind of soul. These individuals are the silent observers, the gentle listeners, and the profound healers of our society. They do not seek the spotlight, nor do they demand applause for their constant sacrifices. Instead, they navigate life with an open heart, guided by a profound intuition and a deeply rooted empathy that allows them to feel the unseen currents of human emotion. They can walk into a crowded room and instantly sense the unspoken sorrows, the hidden anxieties, and the silent pleas for help that others seamlessly ignore. This extraordinary emotional intelligence is a magnificent gift. It is the very foundation of human connection, the invisible thread that binds wounded hearts together and offers solace in times of despair. However, in the complex landscape of human relationships, this radiant light can sometimes act as a beacon in the darkest night, drawing in ships that are entirely lost, and more tragically, those that are looking to plunder. Without ever intending to, these deeply compassionate individuals often find themselves standing directly in the crosshairs of a completely different psychological archetype. They unknowingly become the perfect, ultimate target for those who operate not on empathy, but on extraction. This is not a tale of weakness or foolishness. It is a profound psychological journey into how the most beautiful human traits can be weaponized by those who lack them, and how understanding this unseen dynamic is the first step toward reclaiming one's peace and personal sovereignty. To understand how this delicate trap is set, we must first examine the very nature of profound empathy. For the deeply compassionate soul, feeling the pain of another is not merely a passing thought or a polite social gesture. It is a visceral, full-body experience. It is an intricate way of existing in the world. When they see someone hurting, their immediate, unquestioned instinct is to step into the storm alongside them, to offer a sheltering embrace, and to help carry the heavy emotional burdens that the other person bears. This immense capacity to give is incredibly rare, and it is precisely what makes them so profoundly valuable in any human connection. They remember the smallest details. They care deeply about the unsaid words lingering beneath a simple conversation. They possess an almost magical ability to make others feel entirely seen and completely validated. Yet, the tragic irony is that this beautiful desire to heal what is broken is exactly what predatory personalities, such as narcissists, are perpetually hunting for. A narcissist navigates life with a hollow core, an endless, gaping void that constantly requires external validation, unyielding attention, and emotional energy to sustain their fragile ego. They are emotional survivalists looking for an endless supply of warmth. And when they encounter someone whose very nature is to endlessly provide that warmth, the narcissist recognizes that they have found the ultimate prize. The beginning of this dangerous dynamic rarely looks like a threat. In fact, it often looks exactly like a miracle. The predatory personality is a master of observation and mimicry. They do not introduce themselves with demands or cruelty. Instead, they approach with a carefully constructed mask of charm, confidence, and, most importantly, a fabricated vulnerability. They will share stories of their past hardships, of how they have been misunderstood or deeply betrayed by the world. They present themselves as a strong but tragically wounded bird, desperately in need of a safe harbor. For the empathetic listener, this is the ultimate call to action. They look at the narcissist and do not see a manipulator. They see a fragile human being who simply needs the right kind of unconditional love to finally heal. The empathetic individual willingly opens the doors to their inner sanctuary. They begin to pour their time, their boundless energy, and their deepest affections into fixing the unfixable. They believe with every fiber of their being that if they just love this person hard enough, if they are just patient enough, the pain will subside, and the true beautiful person will emerge. But the devastating reality is that the narcissist does not want to be healed. They want to be accommodated. They view the empathetic person's endless forgiveness not as a gift of grace, but as a highly useful tool to be exploited. As the relationship progresses, the subtle testing begins. This is where the empathetic soul's natural inclination to see the absolute best in people becomes their greatest blind spot. Because they are driven by a philosophy of hope and redemption, they have a dangerous tendency to completely ignore the early warning signs of toxicity. When the narcissist dominates a conversation, dismisses a feeling, or makes a sharply cruel joke, the empathetic partner does not immediately recognize it as a symptom of malicious control. Instead, their mind instantly searches for a compassionate justification. They tell themselves that their partner is simply stressed from work, that they had a difficult childhood, or that it was just a temporary misunderstanding. They grant the benefit of the doubt with such frequency that it becomes a habit of self-betrayal. They continuously translate disrespectful behavior into a language of hidden pain. Instead of seeing a selfish and demanding nature, they see a profound insecurity that needs soothing. The narcissist calculates this dynamic meticulously. They learn exactly how far they can push, how quickly the other person will forgive, and how easily they can shift the blame. They weave a confusing web of alternating warmth and coldness, drawing the empathetic person closer with fleeting moments of absolute perfection, only to push them away just enough to keep them hopelessly off balance. This cycle of intermittent reinforcement forces the empathetic individual into a state of permanent emotional endurance. People with this depth of feeling often possess a surprisingly high tolerance for emotional pain. Throughout their lives, they have frequently felt like outsiders, misunderstood by the broader society, learning early on how to process their own heavy emotions in total silence. They are accustomed to carrying heavy loads. So, when the relationship becomes difficult, when the emotional atmosphere grows thick with tension, unspoken anger, and subtle passive aggression, they do not pack their bags and leave. They simply widen their stance and prepare to carry the heavier burden. They mistakenly equate their ability to endure suffering with the strength of their devotion. They remember their own periods of darkness and tell themselves that they must be the anchor for their deeply troubled partner. But enduring continuous emotional damage is not a measure of authentic love. The narcissist thrives on this stoic endurance. They escalate their tactics, moving from subtle slights to outright gaslighting, twisting reality until the empathetic partner can no longer trust their own memories or judgments. The compassionate soul takes on all the blame, endlessly analyzing what they could have done differently, entirely unaware that the game was fundamentally rigged against them from the very first moment. Deepening the trap is the empathetic person's incredibly idealistic view of romance and human connection. They are not interested in superficial bonds. They yearn for a love that is transcendental, a profound meeting of minds and spirits that defies the ordinary. They want a partnership that feels destined, a shared journey of mutual growth and profound spiritual intimacy. The narcissist, possessing an innate predatory intelligence, senses this deep yearning perfectly. During the initial stages of the connection, they completely mirror these grand ideals. They engage in marathon conversations about the universe, about childhood dreams, and about deep philosophical truths. They morph themselves into the exact shape of the empathetic person's lifelong fantasy. They declare that they have never felt understood by anyone else until this exact moment. To the hopeful heart, this feels like an absolute revelation, a divine confirmation that their long wait for a soulmate is finally over. But this incredibly intense mirroring process, widely known as love bombing, is an illusion. It is an emotional data-gathering mission. The narcissist is actively cataloging the hopes, the fears, and the deepest desires of their target, strictly to use them as levers of control later on. When the mask finally begins to slip, and the deep, soulful conversations are suddenly replaced by chilling indifference, the empathetic person is left utterly devastated, mourning not just a changing relationship, but the agonizing death of a profound dream. As the illusion shatters, a critical vulnerability is violently exposed. The deeply compassionate individual often struggles immensely with the concept of setting and maintaining rigid boundaries. For someone whose core identity is built entirely upon giving, comforting, and accommodating others, the act of saying no feels almost like a moral failure. They are terrified of causing disappointment, deeply afraid that setting a firm limit will make them appear selfish or uncaring. Rather than drawing a hard line in the sand to protect their own mental health, they continually choose to extend their own limits. They compromise their sleep, their personal time, and their emotional reserves, constantly offering more of themselves to bridge the growing gap. Narcissists have an absolute disdain for boundaries. They view any restriction on their access to their partner's energy as a personal insult and an unacceptable challenge to their authority. When they encounter someone who finds it physically painful to say no, they view it as an open invitation for total emotional colonization. They will push, prod, and guilt trip until every single defense is systematically dismantled. The empathetic person, desperately trying to maintain the peace, apologizes for things they never did, slowly shrinking their own existence to accommodate the ever-expanding ego of their partner. They lose their voice, their autonomy, and eventually their sense of self. At the very core of this tragic surrender lies an overwhelming fear of conflict and a desperate desire to maintain emotional harmony at all absolute costs. Highly empathetic individuals do not just dislike arguments. Their entire nervous system recoils at the presence of interpersonal hostility. The mere hint of someone being deeply disappointed or angry with them can trigger a profound internal earthquake. They will go to breathtaking lengths to smooth things over, taking the role of the perpetual peacekeeper. This intense fear is often deeply rooted in an unconscious terror of abandonment, a lingering shadow from earlier times when they were made to feel that their worth was entirely dependent on their usefulness to others. The narcissistic personality weaponizes this fear with surgical precision. They create entirely unnecessary dramas, fluctuating wildly between intense affection and punishing silence. This calculated unpredictability is designed to keep the empathetic partner in a constant state of agonizing anxiety, always walking on eggshells, entirely focused on regulating the narcissist's volatile moods. The empathetic person stays absolutely quiet about their own suffering, convinced that if they just suppress their own needs completely, harmony will eventually be restored. But true peace is never achieved through absolute subjugation. Yet, even the deepest wells of human endurance eventually run dry. There comes a defining, pivotal moment in the life of the empathetic soul when the absolute exhaustion outweighs the persistent fear. The physical and mental toll of constantly managing a one-sided, emotionally vampiric relationship reaches a breaking point. They look at the empty space where their joy, their vibrant energy, and their radiant spirit used to be, and a quiet, undeniable realization begins to take root. They begin to see the terrifying machinery behind the illusion. They finally understand that the relationship was never about mutual healing or profound connection, but entirely about unilateral control. The red flags they once painted white are now glaringly obvious. The painful truth emerges from the shadows. The person they were trying to save is actually the very person who is drowning them. This awakening is an excruciatingly painful process. It requires the empathetic individual to mourn the loss of the beautiful potential they so desperately believed in. It forces them to confront the devastating reality that their immense kindness was coldly and calculatedly exploited. But within this profound agony lies the absolute genesis of a massive personal transformation. The veil is permanently lifted, and the journey toward true emotional liberation finally begins. The path to reclaiming one's life requires learning a completely new language, the language of firm, unapologetic boundaries. For the first time, the deeply feeling individual must embrace the profound discomfort of saying a complete, absolute no. They must learn that their empathy is a sacred treasure, not an endless, free-pot commodity for anyone who demands it. Establishing a boundary feels revolutionary, perhaps even aggressively selfish to a mind conditioned entirely to serve others. But as they begin to construct these emotional fences, something magnificent happens. They realize that boundaries are not cruel walls designed to punish the world. They are beautiful, necessary gates designed to protect their inner sanctuary. The narcissist, faced with these sudden limits, will predictably react with extreme outrage, intense guilt-tripping, or vicious smear campaigns. They will fight desperately to regain their lost control. But the awakened soul no longer absorbs the blame. They hold the line. They learn that walking away from someone who deliberately harms them is not a failure of love, but the ultimate triumph of self-respect. They learn to trust the quiet, persistent voice of their intuition that always warned them when something was fundamentally wrong. They stop demanding answers from a person fundamentally incapable of honesty, and instead, they find their closure within their own restored strength. This profound transformation does not mean the empathetic person must become hardened, cynical, or cold toward the world. The absolute greatest victory against a predatory personality is not becoming like them, but remaining a deeply feeling human being who has simply acquired wisdom and self-protection. The beautiful traits that made them a target in the first place, their immense capacity to care, their enduring patience, and their belief in human goodness, are still their greatest strengths. But these strengths are now guarded by the fierce, unwavering protector of self-awareness. They learn to meticulously evaluate the reciprocity in their relationships. They ask themselves if they feel safe, respected, and equally nourished, rather than just needed and consumed. They finally understand that true, authentic love does not constantly require the sacrifice of their sanity. It does not demand that they shrink to keep another person comfortable. Real connection thrives on mutual respect, honest vulnerability, and a shared commitment to building each other up. The survivor of narcissistic abuse emerges from the ashes not as a victim, but as a powerfully grounded individual. They no longer mistake trauma bonds for profound romance. They no longer confuse emotional extraction with an opportunity to heal the world. The journey of the highly empathetic soul is one of the most beautiful narratives of the human experience. If you find yourself resonating deeply with this delicate balance of immense giving and immense vulnerability, you must absolutely remember this fundamental truth. You were never put on this earth to be an emotional landfill for those who refuse to heal themselves. Your profound capacity to feel the world's pain is a gift meant to be shared with those who also know how to tend to your garden, not just those who wish to trample your flowers. Do not let the dark encounters with manipulative forces convince you that your beautiful heart is a flaw. Instead, let those painful lessons be the armor that protects your brilliant light. You have the absolute right to live fully, to feel deeply without constantly bracing for impact, and to love fiercely without ever losing yourself in the process. May you always find the immense courage to protect your peace, to honor your boundaries, and to surround yourself only with connections that bring out the absolute best of your magnificent spirit. The world desperately needs your empathy, but more importantly, you need it for yourself. Stand tall in your quiet strength, and never let anyone dim the profound beauty of who you truly are.